Thank you everyone. Thank you to the students and my dear colleagues for being here. And I'm grateful for, of course, all of your presence and of course our guest presence today, Rochelle Podka, very popular name in the poetry circles. And I managed to ask for her time, her precious time, because she's been extremely busy with her promotions. I think she'll be taking the flight directly from here to another country for another literature festival. And she was kind enough to say yes to us because I was very keen that at least our students should be able to meet and greet this brilliant author whom I myself admire the most. So the moment she said yes, I said let the wheel get rolling and let's prepare it and have it done. So let's celebrate this day for the fact that Rochelle is here in VIPS, and considering her merit in poetry is something Jayant Mahapatra, the late Jayant Mahapatra, has himself accounted for. Without any further ado, let's come back to Coins and Rivers, and of course the very purpose for which we all have gathered today, that is the discussion of the aesthetic landscape of Indian English poetry today. So Rochelle, thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning or good afternoon everybody. Are we awake? It's lovely to see you, and I'm always very glad when I am in the midst of young minds and young hearts. And I think young minds and young hearts are not to do with age, but to do with the stages of life. And it gives me great pleasure to always be in the midst of academia. And thank you, Bhawna, for having me over. And thank you, the whole VIPS, for welcoming me so warmly.
So, poetry causeries, as it is about some informal and formal talk on poetry, on the current landscape of Indian English poetry and so forth. So my first question, without any further ado, would be, of course, taking into account this aesthetic landscape of Indian English poetry, where would you see yourself as a poet in terms of fusing that aesthetics with, that aesthetics with revolution, this romance with revolution that I found in Coins and Rivers, and this desire and defiance that meet at odd ends, but yet is able to pronounce itself more vociferously than has ever been done in your previous books. So how do you see and of course map your own work and your own poetic credo in comparison to your previous poetic collections? And I have paper Asylum with me. The very title, I was blown away with the title of the same, Paper Asylum. 4 Degrees of Separation, Arithmetic of Press is not with me at the moment. And of course, Coins and Rivers.
Yeah. And Bombay Hangovers.
And Bombay Hangovers.
Story collection. Yeah. So first and foremost, I'll ask you a simple question, because I'll answer to both, to your very khatarnak questions that you have, Bhavna, always, and also the simple answers that can come out from them. First and foremost, tell me, how many of you read poetry here? Raise your hands. Oh, that's a lot. I wasn't expecting that. Because, thank you. Because poetry is such an abstract form. I think it's like the telegrams from the universe. Yeah. And I think it's the Morse code of the universe. So when in the pandemic, we had the most uncertain times, and there was death all around us. There were deaths perhaps in our families, but all around us. And it was a pandemic. So it was not like you could look at some other country and think about, okay, they are doing it differently. It was happening everywhere. We were all flummoxed at the same time. We were all gobsmacked. We were all uncertain at the same time. During those moments, it was poetry that was the island of solace. It was people didn't turn to the news, because the news was devastating. It was not even, of course they turned to Netflix, we turned to streaming stations, but we also turned to poetry. And poetry was consumed the most. Why was it consumed so much? Because in such a short form, in one page, you could make some sense. Because poetry itself is senseless. Poetry is abstract. Poetry is something that comes almost like a dream or a prayer, which is never very well articulated for the normal world of language and linguistics, because it is so abstract. But it makes sense. That abstract language makes sense, and that's why people came to poetry. And I thought that was a very redeeming factor, because during those times there were very new poets who were born as well. Lots of people got to writing more poetry, whether you saw them on Insta, whether you later saw them at the open mics, but many came to poetry. Poetry became the dawai. It became the daru, it became the dua. So it kind of redeemed something in me that there is something about poetry, because wherever I go, you'll always find this question which is not so abnormal or misplaced. Can you have a career in poetry? Is it lucrative enough? Does it pay the fees, the bills, the rent? And the question is always that poetry, the fact that it even survives in the capitalistic world with giving you things which money can't buy, how can it even survive here? Because poetry gives you solace. It gives you semblance. It gives you a sense of the world. What product gives you the sense of the world that money can buy? Nothing much. Maybe a movie can, maybe a song can, but then again it's the arts, right? Yeah. So the arts gives you something that money can't buy. So my answer and question was always, how can we have parameters of capitalism associated with it? That I always speak about, because it is so necessary to locate poetry in this world, in this capitalistic world. And now coming to the, to the books, thank you so much for mentioning all my books. So what I noticed with the books, especially the poetry books, so I write short stories, I write screenplays, and I write poetry. When I write poetry, there is no outline, okay, because poetry is one exhalation. It's like a lightning bolt of realization. It's not something that I can outline and then I can come the next day and write the next page and the next part. But it is something that you are attacked like a wild animal in your wilderness. You write it down. You can come again in time intervals to edit it. That's what you can do, to chisel out what's unnecessary, okay, or to keep the line breaks, or to keep playing with those semicolons and spaces, because the space on the page matters a lot. The space on the page is like the pause in music. Yeah, it's like the silence after a sunset. But that's about it. You cannot outline a poem, you just write it. And so what I've noticed is that in all these books, it starts with the very personal. Being a woman, it's about the woman in the city until it becomes the citizen in the world. Yeah. And then finally, what happens once you disrobe your identities and your signifiers and your cultural, your cultural definitions. You also perhaps become an atom in the world, you become nobody. And I think being nobody is my biggest mission. To be that atom in the galaxy where you can notice everything and not be anyone and yet record it. So the trajectory of these books also go simultaneously, all three of them. Not Bombay Hangovers, because that was like very those short stories written about Bombay characters, written about the city in terms of its noise and silence, its smells and its perfumes, its love stories. So Bombay Hangovers was very outlined, but this one always follows this concentric circles of expansion from the personal to the political, and even the stars, galactical.
Thank you. That takes me to the next question. Since you mentioned about how fluctuating this idea of language is, Harold Pinter says, language in art is almost like a quicksand. It slips over. Right. The more you try to tame it, the more it slips over your hand. Or maybe it's like a trampoline. Or it's the most kind of ambiguous form of transaction if you're using it in art. Language, the most ambiguous as a transaction. So talking about that idiom, if you take into account, the Indian idiom, how would you and where would you locate, and what all had been the features that typify themselves as to be typically Indian per se? Right. That's something that can be found in your books, as Mahapatra has talked about how cosmopolitan your own language is. Mm-hmm. So what is that idea of language if you take into account and have it especially within the perimeters of Indian English? Mm-hmm. How would you define that?
So, I think there's English poetry, there's Indian poetry, which is all the multilingualism that we are blessed with, and we always have our mother tongues, and we have many other tongues that when we travel, we adopt those languages, they seep into us, so we are rich, because we are such a rich country of languages, and they have much more syntax and grammar and vocabulary. And then you have Indian English, which is somewhere in the middle, between far away from post-colonialism, and that language, that hangovers don't always come into poetry, because we've moved into contemporary concerns we talk about today's times. So we are not just talking about colonial times. We're talking about today's world, and we're talking about, we are also using our multilingual surs. There's always Hindi somewhere in my poetry. There's always maybe Konkani somewhere, maybe Marathi somewhere, or all the multilingual lingualism I ingest.
Yeah.
So I think it makes for a very rich kind of boli, the Indian English, and again it has a big linguistic pitch, because it's like just like if you love to cook. And you love to cook so much that you'll invent dishes till it becomes almost gourmet. It becomes your signature dish. That's what happens with craft. That you like language so much that you keep, more and more vocabulary. You get more and more syntax. You are like, why don't I say this way? Why don't I say it that way? That comes in craft. That comes in the experimentation of voice and worldview. But you're experimenting. So there's a point also at the other end of the spectrum wherein if you're a chef and you create a certain gourmet new recipe, it's not edible by the person in front. Because they are like, isko khaye kaise? Aise khaye, muh khol ke ya tod ke khaye? Because they are like, what have you made?
True.
So we reach at the other end of the spectrum because we are so involved with that craft. So there is a point where little before it, and in the median spectrum, wherein you need to stop because you need to also understand who are you talking to. So that, I call it the linguistic pitch, which is a spectrum from it being very opaque and inaccessible, where only the chef knows ki kya banaya hai ye. Whereas there's this middle thing wherein thoda invent kiya hai, thoda I have given you something familiar, some dish you know and something you don't, and then there is the other side, jahan se chawal banaya hai. So we are somewhere in the middle. And it's better to be in the middle somewhere, which I'm noticing that because I went to Kunzum, Delhi, to launch my book day before. And I went to Gurgaon yesterday. And I'm also going to Goa's, because I'm a Goan, so I would never leave my Goan bookstores. I also did a lot of, poetry engagements with Pune. So what I'm noticing is with the young, especially with the young poets, we don't want that gourmet where you have to say, kisko khaya kaise jayega? Abhi give me the key also how to eat. Give me the spoon and give me how to break it. You also want to be in that range wherein give me something challenging, but give me also something familiar. So that I can also come into the folds of it. So I think that's where Indian English is best suited, according to me, but this is not a prescription. This I'm thinking more of as my mantra, because the moment you prescribe, what happens, Bhawna? You become a doctor, an unwanted doctor.
Yeah, true. Thank you for, serving this platter of poetry as a gourmet. That's wonderful. That reminds me, maybe from Coins and Rivers, you can read out if you'd like to. These two, Frog Postmodern and Litter of Application to School Principle. That I quite like, how there's this constant play of language, and this linguistic determinism is questioned and broken at every line. So I was very intrigued with this 25th poem, that is Litter of Application.
Thank you.
And there's also this lot of caste and class that I found that is very subtly woven between the lines, that if the readers would like to really perceive them.
Right. So I just want to mention that, so my poetry books usually will have, feminist poetry or poetry on sensuality. Sometimes when I read a poem of sexual desire or sensual desire, I put a trigger warning. Because just like you put a trigger warning for sexual violence, because I think there needs to be also a place where sexual desire is not judgmental. We don't have judgments on it, because you always have judgments on anything a woman does, and if you express one thing, you can't express the other. And I feel we are always in a pendulous slide between guilt, shame, fear on one side with sexual violence, and taboo and judgments on the other side if you express anything affirmative. So that is one thing. And the other thing that I try to break, which I'll read to you with this poem, is the fact that proper English, where you have to be so proper with your vocabulary, your diction, your syntax, that you're like, main kab improper ho jaun? When can I make those bloody mistakes? Because I want to make those masterpieces, but I want to make a lot of mistakes. And I want to permit myself to make those mistakes. And I want to be free and wild on the page, at least in draft 1. आप ड्राफ्ट 2 में पकड़ लीजिए एडिटर जी, लेकिन and draft like final draft में तो रीडर पकड़ लेंगे, but draft 1 should be mine.
Yeah.
So there's also this idea that I want to break proper English and I want to be having fun with it, maybe having, like as we said, the influence of different languages. So I'll read this one, but this one I must say, when Nizam Ezekiel, the father of
it reminded me
English
of that.
poetry.
Yes, it reminded me.
Yes,
of the same,
when this mic is working well, right? Yeah. You all can hear me. This one, yeah. So when Nizam Ezekiel would write poetry, he would either write somber poetry or it would be fun. So when the fun poems were always, they were great fun, but later, as the generations went by, some corners critiqued it by saying that you have mocked the protagonist in the poem. So if the protagonist did not speak English, by mocking the bad English, you also mock the person not speaking good English.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that sounds valid. He didn't do it intentionally, but it sounds valid today. We are becoming more sensitive as a society today. Yeah. How can I have such an improper poem where I mock maybe the language but not the person? And that's very difficult to do. That is more difficult to do than to write a nice other poem on sunsets and butterflies.
Yeah, true,
but
very true.
I tried, and you will see it for yourself here. Letter of application to a school principal. Loving sir, my son Premnath, 6th B, is the star of my eyes. We got invitation to Korpati, show on TV, come bull, beat me. His face is going down when his mother say he can't come and wait for exams, or else he dance to his expressions. His mind is eating grass, a curtain fall over his mind. The matter has become tight in our homes. His mother is making food and steel tiffins our first flight. If I win lottery, even with slowest finger first, I will make your mouth sweet. All 5 fingers in ghee. In our breaths come breaths. But please let my son waste exam for show. His mother made him here ripe and raw. I make one my sweat and blood. Saved money for new clothes by every inch of my hair. Rickshaw driver, I see whole city. Bandra to Bhainder. Go back to Bihar, they said. The city played over our lives. In our stomachs are always jumping rats. We will give answer now of bricks with stones in the dark night, 4 days of moon. I sell milk first, but now it is in cold boxes in shops. Milk to milk, water to water. The house cock is in the dal. Something's black in the dal. Some part of my brain go loose, so 3-wheelers. He will study hard once coming back. God promise. Double in night, 4 times in day. We don't let him cut our nose, water sprinkling over our hopes. Our respect shouldn't be removed or get lost in the mud. His mother will eat him alive. We will color him in our own colors, or the Ganga will flow in U-turn, and I will make the donkey my father. Once we win the crore, 1 pomegranate, 100 sick. For the neighbors, may worms fall in their mouths. Staying in the pond and fighting with crocodiles, going to sea and returning thirsty. But my heart first is becoming a balloon. Hope your school has night English school for Wifeba and me. This life is hard, a milky cow's kick we have to bear. Brinjal on my plate, this hand give, that hand take. On each grain is written the eater's name. Luck is a guest only for 4-5 days. Thank you, sir, for your permission. Your loving Shanku Ram Murari.
So every line, when I first read it, every line that spoke on itself on the words, that translation went in my head, and that made me laugh and wonder what Kafka has mentioned, that language is is nothing but a poor translation. It's never really complete. It's like a quicksand. Right. The more you try to control it, the more it slips away of your hand. Right. But what he was trying to say, Shanku Ram Murari, he could understand it very well.
And because I think also that, we all know of people in our lives who use proverbs, right? Yeah. They will always tell us something of Gyan, but they'll tell us in their proverbs. And I think we do resort sometimes in communication to proverbs when you can't find anything to say, like Shanku Ram Murari is struggling to tell what he has to say, but he knows his proverbs well.
Yeah.
So why doesn't he educate the principal with that, right?
Yeah. And he said it quite well.
Yes, he said it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my next question is, I've seen at a lot of places, there's this emotional register that almost nudges itself at every line, and line breaks and so forth. Why and how, basically? What would you suggest to maybe some practicing poet, how it doesn't sound itself to be more like an emotional roller coaster on page, yet at the same time it is also able to maintain that aesthetic part of the same.
Right.
So what would you suggest? And my particular reference is Stillborn and Routine. Routine is something I go back to it again and again, and it just speaks to me every time I visit this.
And I'm so glad, because Routine is a very fun poem.
Yeah.
Because I do also believe in not just writing improper English poems, but also fun poems, because I feel sometimes, yes, you could use all kinds of language, but there's a place for fun. Now, emotional register, Bhavna, this is something which only any reader can understand, because I don't think as a poet when I'm writing to think that, okay, यहाँ पे ये line break से ये रस निकलेगा for the reader. Yeah, because I don't think we have evolved to that levels of craft where we say that, okay, I'm going to do this, because then it's also very, very conscious and manipulative in some way during the creation process. So I think what happens is the other way around. I write for my own emotional registering, because I am my first reader and I am my first audience. And when I'm writing poetry, it's my catharsis or my compulsiveness to tell it first. And then it is you, the reader, or anyone else, the reader. So if you get because I'm noticing one thing that, and this is not just for my poetry, but for every poem, that different readers will interpret the poem differently.
Absolutely.
So because of that, it becomes a different poem. And when you read a poem, like I think I should also read Biscuity Love, because I think half of you are in love here. Raise your hands who's in love. Now that's a dangerous question. Thank you. Who else? It's all secretive. Okay. And I didn't say love always with another person. See. Oh God. People are very honest. Huh? Thank you for being so honest in love. But not just love with other people, but it could be self-love, it could be love for an idea, it could be so many kinds of love. But I always read Biscuity Love when I'm, with young people, and that's from 4 Degrees of Separation. I think I should read it to entertain you all, actually. But coming back to it, I think I write, whether it's prose poetry, which is a large chunk, right? The Japanese short forms of poetry, which I teach in Himalayan Writing Retreat, is writing in lyrical prose blocks. And I teach them even at colleges. I teach them at St. Xavier's in Bombay. I teach them at Wilson's. I try to put them on the syllabus boards, IBUN and the syllabus board.
And next month you're going to Iowa.
I'm going to Iowa to teach creative writing in Iowa's USA, and wherever I get a chance, if I'm on the syllabus board, I put it on the syllabus. That's very simple. But what does this prose poetry form do, Haibun? It liberates you if you are a storyteller. How many people write stories here? Okay. And how many write stories and poetry? Yeah. So for you, this form is very nice, because it's like a prose poetry form, and it's lyrical, and there's a little bit of poetry, and there could be a little bit of narrative or character. I think it's the most liberating form, Haibun. And if you only want to write poetry, you have the free verse. So I feel the emotional registers, what you talk about, I think that comes to the reader. But as a writer, I'm just searching for which form will embody which idea. Sometimes you have this very good idea, but it's for a screenplay. Yeah. Because it's so potent, the canvas is so large, I can't put it on a Haibun. So I'll have to forego that idea, park it somewhere, and take another one. And now once you practice enough, like आपकी रियाज काफी हो गई, तो your ideas you'll automatically know कि ये तो हाइकू ही बनेगा.
True.
और ये तो free verse ही बनेगा.
It finds itself.
हाँ, ये तो हाइकू ही बनेगा, because this is just so short, so small. So that's how.
And why not Biscuity Love and Routine and Stillborn, 3 of them?
Okay, so
yeah.
I just search where this Biscuity Love.
Let me find. Maybe you can. Maybe the index page. I'll find it. Maybe you can read routine.
Yeah, I'll read
stillborn.
routine. Yeah, I'll read routine till then. Okay, so routine, there are some poems which you don't have to preamble because there's no need to preamble them. They are preambled or in themselves. Sometimes the poem is its preamble. She woke with no memory and wasn't even a person. She smelled boiling tea leaves and was instantly a human. She sent the children to school, husband to work, and screamed at the maid, the milkman, and the dhobi. When the house grew quiet, she applied makeup and became a woman. She went to the bazaar, bank, court, and became a citizen.
Yeah.
She watched the lilt of bougainvillea and became a vermin. Men drooled at a saffron blouse, red chiffon sari, and she became a siren. Crossing the road, muttering galis, she became a gorilla. She slurred at the fishermonger over the price and became an unreasonable bourgeois. She fought with the rickshawala and came home by bus and stripped to her boudoir. Next, she cooked vegetable soup and slurped it with breadsticks and became a rich lady, Tina Ambuja. The whole afternoon, she watched TV and became Ashok, Dinanath, and Savitri, Simar, Moolchand, and Chota Bheem. She dressed before her kids and man came home and bringing them tea, became a wife and mother again. All through the evening, she was a tyrant with the homework. As the kids phoned their boyfriends, she was an eavesdropper on high alert. By night, when her man rocked and ruled over her, she was a prima donna in the dark. When he spoke of how he was servant, slave, superman, sycophant, termite in a crowded train, she became his patient confidant. They spoke of a festival where his mother would come and she would become daughter-in-law, then devotee to the mother-in-law's god and hence a hypocrite again. Together, through the scent of their bodies, the sweat of their toil, they then scored and scored before they closed the curtain and all the doors on this very long day and very short night and became atoms again.
Very beautiful.
Thank you.
Biscuity love.
Okay, Biscuity Love, I think I'll stand up and do.
Yeah.
So Biscuity Love is one of my oldest poems, and it is, how do you say, a poem of small town love. And because I don't know how many people of you heard of the place Kalyan. It's near Mumbai. Okay, yeah. So I was born and brought up in Kalyan, and naturally it's a small town, and it had all its small towniness that still is there in me. Like, I mean, whenever I write stories of small town India, I always think of Kalyan, and it somehow merges with all the small towns. Everyone has the same small town experience. And so the love of a small town is also very innocent and quaint, and in any case, first loves are like that, like small towns. Biscuity love. Also, I must mention this. When you are in love, I can't say for everybody, I'll only say for myself. Of course, again, I can't be prescriptive. Sometimes you feel like biting the lover. So when I felt this was that kind of mood wherein you want to biscuit ki tarah kha jayenge. It was that kind of love, okay? After that, may have been one time when it was sherni ki tarah kha jayenge. But this was that kind. Memory is images of a prepubescent boy cycling home. Parag milk packets in one of his arms. Feeding biscuits to a stray gaggle of brown dogs wagging their shins. Large half-moon eyes, kind salivating tongue. His smile showed no cookie crescent as he fed them all. He was my first love. More than the girls, the calves and canines knew his way home. This small towner from a bygone Bharat, who found humans in animals, he grew hunger in me. Now in this moffing, super quick India, his animals are holographic. His love fades cookie slim to the sun of many states, tastes, time zones. He has not one trail from work to home, but 10 homes. He the color of chocolate, almond abdomen. He found love in many cities, technology girls, animals and liberated women who fed off his glucose, milk, sugar, marmalade. They never grew thin. Over the trail of his virgin white honey, the scent of Shuddh Desi, old world in new crackling wrapping, always with a 30% improved marking. Bearing the saccharine of my bites and goosebumps, he now breaks under my neurotic granular breath. Chai mein duba hua, tea dunked, wafer thin, milk cruxed. My Pickwick Marie Polygy Tiger, Oreo Bourbon, mall shelf Belgian, online, baked and ordered. Same old, same new, premium, cream, grunge, love.
Thank you. You take this one. I'll fix it. You take this one. That was wonderful. We all thoroughly enjoyed it, and of course, thought of when can we have our tea and biscuit next. Okay. And of course, I was looking forward to this stillborn too, which I feel the students would be able to.
Yeah.
Relate
But I think
well.
stillborn we'll do after a little bit of time, because stillborn will take you to another register, which is a little darker register. And I do believe that we dabble in all the navarasas, because we are of all the navarasas, so we could be from happiness to sadness to grief to sorrow.
Okay, right now of course we are in that.
We are in the biscuity zone,
Yeah.
so we'll glide there.
Yes,
Quietly.
sure. So maybe any other poem of from Coins and Rivers that you'd like to.
Yeah. What's your farmaish? Do you want do you have any particular emotion or any particular? I know you haven't read this book, but anything in particular? Okay, I'll read. Yeah.
Yeah. Bolo.
Someone said something? Because I like all the poems, I wrote them at different times. So, Bedding Day is something which I'll do later.
Yeah,
it's
I missed out probably.
Poem.
Yeah. Bedding Day, yes.
Yeah, Bedding Day I'll do later because it's again fun. Okay, let me go to the earlier part of the women-centric poems. I think I would like to do this.
Yeah, and this In That Land Under Sun,
Yes.
from this particular one to Spring Again, I found
Yeah.
this feminist solidarity that speaks of, that is just speaking of many of these women together and how they come together and create this feminist space. At the same time, not talking of that misandry,
Yes.
which is why feminism is misunderstood highly, not talking of that male bashing that we usually misunderstand with the idea of feminism.
Yes, yes.
So,
Yeah, so you tell me, it could be the Ice Factory or in the...
how about the girl from Lal Bazaar?
That would be a little too...
Again, the
yeah, it
darker
would have
side.
to be better... no. The language is at a higher pitch, so it's better read. Sometimes when the language is at a higher pitch, the performance of the poem is like, it's not that performative.
Yeah.
It's more intimately read.
Okay, so your choice.
So you tell me, the choice is Ice Factory or...
Ice Factory, maybe.
Or...
Three Women on Liberty Bridge.
No, that is again an intimate one.
Okay,
In That
you
Land
decide.
Under the Sun.
Okay.
That's more kind of accessible. Or Ice Factory.
Yeah, In That
Tell me,
Land
tell me.
Under the Sun.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a different choice than Amit Ranjan. Professor Amit Ranjan went for Ice Factory. Okay. In That Land Under the Sun, again I won't preamble it too much because some poems don't need that because everything is in the poem. And I'll only say that I have actually visited this place, In That Land Under the Sun. It's Shegaon in Maharashtra, and so the rest is in the poem. In that land under the sun, where dry heat hits bone, and in your pocket you keep a red onion, to peel flakes at 46 degrees centigrade. Male poets speak of Kamala Das and her feminist poetry, entering a friend's wife's kitchen and directing her to abandon her breakfast preparations. They are getting late. There are no cafes in the neighborhood, yet they depart with a caravan of 15 ravenous townspeople. Under an angry sun, hunger hitting inside their guts, pipers talk of timeliness, searching a nowhere wilderness. while the woman in her four-walled steel cliché keeps away a mountain of grated coconut over flattened rice, sugar, coffee, and unused milk parboiled. Her father was a village radical, but she tucks her wet sighs at the edge of a sari. As onions shrivel in our pockets with intense upheaval, men use Urdu and Marathi verses to fight God, and the women can't even fight the men who are not their husbands because they know no poetry.
Very nice, yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, I was just curious about, other than the title, Coins in Rivers, how have you divided the entire text into casino tokens, street artist tips, coins in rivers, banknotes, and then private wallet and antique currency? I was quite intrigued by the title of all of these collections here and there, and I see it's, how it's moving from personal to more social and then to political to finally that existential one.
Yes.
A couple of existential poems too, I found it resonated well with me.
Yes.
For example, the Anthill one, and that was brilliant,
Yes.
the Anthill.
Thank you, thank you. And Anthill is again a love poem. I think you should read Anthill off the page. Because I've read it too many times, I think now the ants will follow me. Itna Anthill pad liya. But the thing is that, this section, the title of this book first was something else, because I felt that poems always disrupt and disturb. And that is the purpose they are there. They are not only there for your catharsis when you are a poet. They are not only there because you compulsively want to write. They are also there because while you achieve catharsis, you also captured what disturbed you. Because you reach a journey, whether you know it or not, because it's a very unconscious journey in writing, in any forms of writing, you reach from a point of disequilibrium to equilibrium. So it ends up disturbing. So I thought these are such inglorious poems, so they are inglorious coins. So my first title for this book was The Inglorious Coins of the Counting House. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was called The Inglorious Coins of the Counting House. Mm-hmm. And all the section breaks were according to that. Okay. Coin imagery and coins and this and that.
True.
And it's only later when my editor Sonali Jindal from Hachette, she said, I love this book, and she championed the book inside the editorial team and to the publisher. Each poem she championed, she loved, and she's a non-poet editor, okay, non-poetry editor. She edits fiction or non-fiction. So she could connect with it, but she said that you'll have to change the title. The title is a little too big, it might not be recalled by everybody. And she suggested one of the sections, which was called Coins in Rivers, to be the title.
Yeah.
And I asked some of my, as you do, when you are taking a decision, you ask your near and dear ones, how do you find these coins in rivers? And most of the people said, we can see it.
Yeah,
and for me as a Hibernian, if you can see something, or a screenwriter, I think the visuality or the visual power of seeing something is more than anything else. Yeah. More than concept, I would go for imagery. Yeah. So I felt, okay, Coins in Rivers, and I think I've been receiving a lot of, good responses on this title. Because everyone talks of the wishing well, they talk of the coins that they kiss and throw, and they talk of, one person even said that there was a river that went dry in South India, and all that was there were coins.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So I was like, okay, there is something about this. Yeah. And then I think now coins is also connected, now that I think about it. Instinctively the title connects to the facts that the two facets of coins are always the two ways of telling history, through the hunter's perspective, through the hunted perspective. Even rivers spark civilization. Not just coins embody civilization, but even rivers, where the rivers exist, civilization exists. True. Where it doesn't exist, civilizations perish. Yeah. So finally it just connected to the creation theories, which I love so much. So it just worked. It worked.
And we missed out the bedding day too. Reading.
Bedding day. I was also wondering if I could read this impromptu poem, which is that piggy bank poem that I don't know where that is. Compatibilities. Yeah, compatibilities.
65.
Yeah. So this one is only for those coins, the chutta paisa. So when some people ask me, does poetry make a living, or does poetry sell? I'll be like, इसलिए तो coins लगाए हैं ऊपर. Just kidding. Just
True.
kidding. We love our coins and we flip them all the time.
Even if they're chuttas, we are happy with them.
Absolutely, because I told you, they give us much more than money can't buy.
Yeah,
so.
true.
Okay, compatibilities. He's a piggy bank. Put in a coin of kindness and he stays smiling on the outside. Snug in the corner of a child's room. I am an attaché of green in a dealer's dirty hands. Exchanged and bartered for arson and ransom. In bloodied hands, my values the same. Hoard for the next big thing, the stakes are changing. Shouldering dreams over my folded years, a ticket of sanctities to major world movements. But he, even if taken in kids' delight, he's always placed back with heartbeats of its owners, growing sapience in a world before adulthood, in a faith of faces, coin collections. Yet, friends, I find his corner by the bed lamps nourishing, and he, my many world transits, the cliffhangers I bring. Beneath the grind, mutual deposit of 25 years, we are the undersong of assurance, new experiences, currency seafarers, both devalued in time, devalued by the next armed aggression.
True.
So I think you got it, right? It's the love story between an attaché of dirty green cash and a piggy bank. So, again, the love stories.
Yeah. Should we move to the next question?
Yeah. Next question.
So, of course, and we were discussing about it, in the conference room. Especially in the current times where internet, especially this free domain of knowledge that comes with internet and in the cyberspace, where do you think poetry has any chance to flourish itself, especially when copies are sold outrageously beyond an author's permission, and they are sometimes stolen? The PDFs are openly out there, circulated in the market. So how can a poet, an aspiring poet, or maybe a practicing poet, or maybe those who are already well established, in the cyberspace, in the digital world, do you see that poetry can survive? And of course, there's an age of Insta poetry too, instantaneous poetry,
yes,
which is 2 lines, 3 lines, and you're done and good with it.
Right. So, there are, your question is multifaceted and intersectional. There are many things to think about here. Technology, of course, and whether market, right? So, I feel in technology, you have Insta poetry. I think even open mics come in technology for me, because it's like you take a mic and you read. So, I feel I don't mind how technology is shaping poetry. Technology will always shape art forms, always. Even ecstasies, like you take poetry and you take Bharatnatyam on the same stage, or you take sand painting and poetry. You can do anything with it.
Yeah.
So I feel that where technology is involved, except when ChatGPT says that it wants to write your poetry, I think that's where I'll stop, because ChatGPT is dumb. Yeah. So that's where I'll stop, because I don't think ChatGPT will be able to tell you your emotions.
Yeah.
You are such a unique person that no two people in the room will have even a similar haiku. Forget a free verse or a screenplay. You won't even have a similar haiku. ChatGPT just can't do that for you. Maybe it can aid in something like, I use ChatGPT as, my proofreader, if at all it can be, like, I don't know. But yeah, something like that. But so I think that when technology shapes art or it shapes poetry, we only need to look for craft. I think craft is always the crux of, or the point where you stop or start. Art is in all of us. We all are blessed. As Indians, I think we are dramebaz people. We have so much of story in us. We have so much of katha in us. Katha se to baad mein pehle kathaएं hain. We have so much of jokes with us. ये क्यों हुआ, ये चाय पे चर्चा तो खत्म ही नहीं होता, चाय खत्म हो जाती है, चर्चे खत्म नहीं होते. So we have a lot of art in us. How do we have craft? I think that is what we need to work on. Everyone who has art and is an artist needs to be a craftist. Then you will think about being a mart and being a martist, going to the mart. So I think technology, if it helps you shape your craft, it's doing good. But I still don't get it when you go to an open mic, a new open mic session, and you will find someone saying, I just wrote this and I'm reading it. No, where's the editing? Where's the editing? Because you're going to read some extra words which the audience will have to listen to. So it's just like a film. You would want the film edited, right? You wouldn't want it to run with raw footage. You wouldn't want to do anything as an overspill, because it's the audience you have to respect. Why should they take an excess? So I have a problem with only that. Unless you are such a good poet editor that you have written it in edited forms only.
True.
And then it's worth reading. So I think craft is essential. Whatever be the technology, you do Insta poetry, you do open mic. Tomorrow there will be newer mediums of technology. I think the craft is something that each individual should do from now till the day they are is their last breath. If they are practicing, if they are doing their riyaz, till the last day you are investing on how to get better with this, not becoming opaque or inaccessible at the other end, but seeing that you are bettering it. How can you say this better? How can you say this more originally? How can it become closer to your voice? I think most of the biggest journey that art has is inwards. While you're reaching outside and you're going in the time progression of the forwardness, you are going deeper in yourself, right? At the end of the journey, you're going to only meet yourself. And you will only meet your self-aware self. The most that you can be aware of or realize in your lifetime. So art will only dig deeper into you, so that you know yourself completely. So then the craft comes from there, because your original voice has to come out. Your language, your syntax, vocabulary, even if you're using the common language of English or some other language, that has to come out. And the other thing you were talking about is the market. So I feel, see, two things about the market. One is market and poetry again don't go together, because we know it's still a thing that has to be developed. I feel that a lot can be done to make poetry very sellable, but it will need the collective Indian English poetry to come together. We cannot achieve, act in silos, in competing 1:1, behaving like tribes.
Right.
If you are in tribes, you have a scarcity mentality.
Absolutely.
When you have a scarcity mentality, no one is getting anything, because there's no sharing. It's only like, isko kyun mila, mujhe kyun nahi mila, isko. We are only doing one versus one.
True.
I feel if you come together as a collective, I mean a true collective, dropping your ego. And ego is a very heavy baggage, very sticky baggage, and no one wants to drop their ego. But knowledge and ego can't stand together.
True.
So either you have to choose knowledge or ego. I mean, I have seen that if I make an egoistic decision is not as good as if I make a strategic decision. So if you make a strategic collective decision, it will benefit everybody.
And then it grows.
It grows exponentially.
Yeah.
Now if you talk about free books and all, there are two ways of looking at it. There are authors who have actually, not poets, authors who have actually gone and sold their books to the Signal Wala in Bombay and said, Signal pe bechna.
Oh,
वो भी होता है, because you are thinking, there are two ways of looking at it. Both can be right. There's no judgment here. One is to say that I have written this, it's written with hard work, there's a price to that, the publisher has put in their investments, you at least buy it. Itna to kar lo. But the other way of looking at it is, you don't know me, so if I sit to sell this, you may never discover me. So what if I give this to you free like a pamphlet? Maybe you read it and discover me. So both ways
it remains.
Both ways.
Yeah. Okay. And I believe one last question I should not come between.
And then stillborn and wedding day, and then
and then their questions.
Yes,
I'm sure they're very curious to ask. Yes. And this is more like in a very grim note. On a very grim note, of course, I'd like to in that fashion too. What if poetry fails to set a chord with the audience? What if it doesn't reverberate?
You
with
mean
them?
this audience? This audience is responding, I can tell you that. Either they're talking amongst themselves and writing new love poems, there I can see. Yeah. And there's someone smiling, so there's a singular poem coming out. I'm just kidding. Yeah. But I think this audience is very responsive. And but audience in general, of course.
In general, and of course to some of the non-believers, some non-conformists, or maybe why would a technocrat would go beyond the rhymes and cadences of a poem and go deeper into its meaning. To all these non-conformists and non-believers who would say, well, poetry hardly sells, or poetry doesn't really make a difference. We do have Auden and number of these poets of the past, of the empire, who have defended them very well. But then to an Indian audience, to whom the language also is almost like a borrowed attire. I call it this language as a borrowed attire. To them, of course, some of them might find it it hardly sells. It doesn't really have any germane that can be derived out of it. So how should a poet respond to it?
So see, one thing I must say that when I was not a poet, not a literati, not a writer, not a screenwriter, I was that commerce student, that MBA in marketing and advertising, who used to not read books. तभी भी मेरा काम चलता था, मेरी जिंदगी चलती थी. कैसे चलती थी? I might have had a friend, a 3 AM friend as they call them. How many people have 3 AM friends? तो फिर आपको शायद पोइट्री की जरूरत नहीं है. It happens because what's art? Art is catharsis, right? Art is sharing. So sometimes the loneliness makes art grow because the lonely reader connects with the book, or the lonely writer writes because और कोई था नहीं सुनने के लिए या और कोई समझने के लिए. So there is also loneliness, or the intimate experience of loneliness, which is one of the very key existential states of boredom and loneliness. I consider are the key existential states. So if you have anything else, you have friends, you have a group, you have Netflix and chill, then you may not need poetry. So I feel during those days when I was not a poet, not a writer, not anything else, तभी भी मेरा काम चल जाता था because I had other means of connecting. What happens, however, they were not deep enough, they were not permanent enough. So I feel everyone will come to search and find what they want. After a point, Bhawna, we can't really go after anybody and say, नहीं ये ना आप read करो या ये आप watch करो. This is also the seeker who comes to find new things. Now, even in cinema, not everyone is a movie channel subscriber because movie channel shows are quite quaint films and all. Not everyone subscribes to that. We subscribe to the more popular channels. Maybe we like a masala movie with popcorn. So the seeker will find what they want. So even for poetry, people who are searching for a deeper abstract meaning will find poetry. Also, you don't have to always go out and you can do that, but you don't have to always, because trust the thirsty, hungry individual. Okay, we are all on a path of thirst. We are all on a path of hunger, and we will find our water and our food. It may not be the same thing. It may not be the same book, the same movie, but we will find and we will be quenched. So I believe in that overall process. And yeah, if it's your book, well and good.
So my takeaway is poetry is your 3 AM friend, and poetry is, if you're a reader of course you're a seeker, as if it is some sort of a divine intimacy that you connect yourself with, and ultimately it comes to you.
Yeah, and
the more you go towards it,
you will find everything depends
it
on
will be
levels of thirst.
quenched. Yeah, eventually. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you want me to read Stillborn?
Yeah, Stillborn, definitely.
So I'm reading 2 more poems and then we're opening it to the questions.
Yeah.
But this poem is from Paper Asylum, so it's a haiku. And I must say that this poem was a poem on domestic violence, because I also believe that, while poetry can be about the butterflies and all things beautiful, they should also be about encapsulating things that are dark, that are thing. And this domestic violent poem is not just of one person, but it is a domestic violent poem of many people, put as one person, as the multiplicity is in the singular protagonist. His father's shadow rises every night with the silhouettes of knives, blades, sickles, belts and whips growing and looming over his mother's face. They rise into his dreams too, with Amar Chitrakatha, Super Commando Dhruva, Superman, Batman, Bone, The Dark Knight Returns, Sandman, X-Men and Watchman. They rise into his mother's screams and voice bubbles from Robo, Final Fantasy, Star Wars and Avatar. There is always good versus evil. Evil loses in the end, its shadow diminishing. Someone always saves the damsel. The meek inherit the earth. Good things happen to good people. His father whips his mother so hard that the shadows in his dreams flicker like a TV set or candle wick. Some shadows do not diminish, even after he opens his eyes. In fact, they spew from every crevice, spawning from the corners of his eyes. They merge with the original shadow of original sin. Why couldn't the superhero in him rise when he knew the names and dialogues, voices and actions of every superhero in every comic, animation, movie and sci-fi film? How many superheroes make one superhero? How many will it take to make him? Periwinkle Sky, the unwanted butterfly after our breakup.
Very nice. How many heroes does it need to have that one superhero in you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last poem is my Badmash poem, Wedding Day. I think I'm going to be writing the next book only on Badmash poems.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's I think 51.
The wedding day is on page number 51.
51, okay. I'll again stand. When Santosh wanted urgent love marriage in just 15 days, he said, I need girl only for me, she has faith fully for me. He looked for simple things. She should be non-Facebook user, exceptionally fair, convented and at least matric and virgin, or issueless and innocent divorcee. Completely non-feminist but an extremist and compassionate, patriotic to country with a keen desire to increase India's military and sports capabilities. Expert in child raising, H1 visa no bar, powerful and rich. And congratulations, he found her, a good name Priya. From top college, 22 or 21, with a dowry of $10,000. They went for a special wedding party with all drinks included. Whiskey, vodka, gin, child beer, strong rum, then old monk. The marriage hall with unisex laboratories for all those gay people was near Sharma Sweets and Snakes, right side to Anus English Academy run by Anu Sharma. In front of Santosh Taylor's Alteration of Ladies and Gents. And welcome tourist office of We Speak English. At the backside gate, visitors were welcome, only regrets to their vehicles and no encouragement of beggars. In trust we God, Santosh wedded Priya. They look like hero and heroine with their crowns, no? Said all. They are laughing so much, showing their Colgate teeth. In such a type of marriage, go slow. This is an accident-prone area, said an uncle. The gifts were many. Bedsheets and Sony erection phones. Organic ghee from tension-free cows and condoms in all flavors like hot air balloons. The only villains were the in-laws who took up the best gifts in compensation. Shoplifters will be prostituted, said Santosh, making his big red eyes. But who were listening? All males and females were busy eating and drinking. Only their dead bodies will go home, he rode, neither on foot or ambulance. Don't these peoples know I am yes for Santosh, satisfaction guarantee. Above all vermins and men's, get my special vitamins. I want 2 children, both men, Yexian Yalian Zen. Thank you.
Wonderful. And the way you recited.